Hello.
Meow, meow, meow.
So what's in a game maker?
Game makers have objects and rooms and scripts
Scripts.
and sprites. That's basically it.
Networking?
Oh, they got sound.
Oh yeah.
Sound.
What's a room?
It's like your level editor. Like you can imagine like a tile-based game. The room is where you draw all the tiles beforehand, and you put objects in the room.
Yep.
And that's like your level.
So this is the game object.
Yeah.
And what?
So that'd be like the players and the bullets and the enemies. Every like object in the game.
Mm-hmm. And so does it have embedded like position and game world for stuff?
It comes with like everything has a position, everything has like a speed, and a rotation, and everything has a sprite as well.
So the object has a sprite.
Yeah. Hang on. The cat just walked out onto the window, wearing the cone. That makes me very concerned that they won't fall down. Hang on.
Okay.
I'm just gonna make sure they get back in.
Mm-hmm.
Right, they're in. Okay, never mind.
So does a level also have some relationship to sprite? Like how do you put images onto a room?
Oh, there's also background images, which are basically sprites, but you load up like a tile set,
mm-hmm.
and then your room can use a cell of a tile set to paint the whole background.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's the relation. It's a separate type of background image.
And what about like collision and objects with like the level?
Mm-hmm. So objects only collide with themselves. The level doesn't have any geometry of its own.
Mm.
So normally like in a tile-based game, you just have this block object that's invisible, and you just paint it around everywhere, and that's
Right.
the room's collision area.
So invisible blocks.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
this
so
is
I guess,
really for making 2D games.
yeah, it's all about 2D games.
And what sort of shape are the blocks? Can you have them? Are they just
It's based
squares?
on the sprite.
Pardon?
It's based on the sprite of the object.
Right.
So whatever size the sprite is, that's the like, dimensions of the object.
And how sort of fine grain can that be? Pixel level.
Yeah, that's a setting of whether the collision is on a per pixel level or like just the whole like rectangle.
Mm.
It doesn't have anything in between though, so that could be improved.
Mm-hmm. What about like events?
Yep, and it's full of events. That's like where you put all your logic. There's like on creation, on destruction, on keypress, on draw, on collision. Like that one's a really useful one. You can say just what happens when things collide,
Right.
and you don't need to do the collision logic yourself.
So you attach an event to a. Like you just define your events, and it will take. Like, is it a sequence of how do you trigger an event? I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, these things happen when they happen.
Yeah.
The engine triggers these events.
And how do you? So the script might have the logic of how these events play out. Maybe.
In these events, okay, let's take out scripts.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just wondering where the game logic lies, I guess.
In the event handlers.
Okay. So this is...
You can basically write scripts in all of those.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And GameMaker has a drag and drop mechanism as well, so you can be like, you can have this GUI action that's like create an object and then give it a name and then sets the velocity of an object, like all drag and droppy.
So you would first write your event like in the GUI, saying like on creation, create this object. So there's this. So does objects have those methods like create?
Yeah. Objects can create more objects, and they can set the properties of objects, including themselves. And
so create itself, create more objects, create other objects.
yeah, so like you could have on key press, like when you press space, you create a bullet object.
Mm.
And then like when you press arrow keys, you change your direction.
I see. So in terms of like the initial state and the game getting loaded and like its main basically, how do you construct that sort of timeline where it starts in an initial state and the initial state has like, would you write an on create event that has like, this is the initial object? And
so in terms of main, you would designate one of the rooms as the main room, like maybe the room that starts the game, and that's probably normally going to be your main menu or something.
Right.
And then it'll load all the objects in that room. All their on creates will fire, and you can also attach a script to the room as well to fire with it.
So is the main designed via the UI? Like how do you design main?
No, this is just what happens. You set a room to be the starting room, and then that's what loads when you start the game. Right.
So you have to have. So if you created all your rooms for the different levels, for example, and you set the initial room to be like room A, and inside room A, after you set the main. So is it a state then? Is it like state transitions for?
Pretty much. Yeah, there's one room active at a time.
So would you say that this thing has the concept of state, like main state, and then that's the initial state?
Yeah, the active room is like the state. Yeah.
Well, the room is the state, as you said, right?
Yeah.
So states are sort of dictated by rooms.
Yeah. I mean, there's also just global variables. You can store whatever state you want as well.
Right.
Across rooms.
Right. So you've associated the initial state to be this room, and then you want let's say you're making a snake game, for example. So you want a snake object there that's maybe just like vertical centered and like a randomly positioned. I think it would be good to like conceptually say like, here's a game like Snake. Let's based on this.
Yeah.
How would you go about putting it together? Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know if this is a good way to do it, but so let's say we're gonna make Snake.
No, drawing out sketches of it.
Huh? Yeah, right. Well, let's just say the room is just like the rectangle.
Yeah, drawing out sketches of the game.
Yeah, and initially you start off with a snake like this, and it randomly populates like in this room the object that you need to go at and get to grow. So based on what we have the object, which is the snake, which has a position, speed, and a bunch of other objects that it could be. So this is another object, which is the apple, right? And that also has a position and has no speed, no changing of its state. So can we talk about...
Your internet connection might be blinking out.
Oh, sorry. Can you see the screen though? Can you hear me?
I can hear like a 10 having a talk and it comes through. Yeah, it's just pretty easy.
Right. Okay.
That's all right. Just
Yeah, so let's talk about like this
There's
snake
just a few
moving
tags when I
around.
talk.
Let's talk about this snake moving around in this game maker. So how do you? I assume like with speed you have some sort of velocity, and that changes your position. And so if you set this this snake to have a sprite of certain length, so this it has to have some sort of dimension of size, right? So how do you work that? So it's sprite based. So if you define the sprite's dimension to be like 4 by 4, I don't know, I'm just making this up, and the room is like 250 by 250. So if your speed calculation is based on just the x and y coordinates, you can just modify where the sprite lives, right? And that's how you will change movement of the snake. But like, what if the snake needs to go like this, where it's like now changed its
Yeah.
so you would just draw the so what is a specific like unit of the sprite called?
So the way you would handle this is you would make the snake up of multiple objects.
Like, yeah, just like multiple blocks, for example, right? And
Exactly.
each one of these will be a tile in the world that corresponds to an image. And so if you press right, you then key press the event for this object and have like a bunch of methods set for like right key press and left key press. When you hit right key press, it will trigger your so how do you store this then, this tile set for the sprite in Game Maker?
But in Game Maker, there's not really any. You don't really store things. Everything just kind of exists.
Okay.
In a flat like set of stuff in your room. But the way I would structure this is I would have the snake head be like the controller, and then all the body segments would be just objects that get created constantly and left behind. And that way you've just got all these like body objects that that show the path of the snake, and also you check for collision with the head and the body.
Yeah, so if you had like the snake object having just the head as the controller, and you know that the snake object might have a size, and so as the head is being controlled, let's say you start off in this initial position of just the straight line, and this is the head.
Yeah.
So if it's going up that way, if it moved like 2 positions, you would just have to. So yeah, I guess what I'm asking you though is like, if you wanted to draw this shape where the head is like turned, but you still have the body like that, how would you encode that in the objects methods, I guess?
So a simple way of going about this is if everything is locked to a grid position, then you could just give every body segment like a duration for which it lives. Like say it lives for 1 second. And then if your head is moving and constantly creating the body segments behind it, then you'll get that. Yeah.
So what you're saying then is like per frame, like the frames are changing, and you're just removing this to be the original state as it's moving, and then
you're just bleeding the tail of the body.
That's a neat thing to do, I guess. My then question is like, how do you say like this thing is going to change in the next frame to something different?
So that's where I suggest make it time-based, that each body segment lives for a period of time, like 1 second, and the longer that is, the longer the body.
So that's something you didn't cover then in terms of how does time fit into this?
Right, yeah. Another event is every step. So you have an event for every frame.
So on
step, it's called.
And is that just based on like the frames per second of the? Or can you change that?
Locked to the frames per second of the game, however fast that is.
Right.
And you can configure that. Like,
Oh, okay.
I think it is by default 30.
Right.
But
Yeah.
yeah, with that, you can just have this like, yeah, a really common thing I would do is to have like a life counter,
Hmm.
which just counts down every step, and once it hits 0, you delete it.
And so deleting this, so would you have these tiles as objects themselves that you're deleting?
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Each one of those is an object, and when they can just delete themselves, and now they're out of the game.
Okay. So can you in this have like an object that has an associated like list of objects that it's associated to?
Yeah, objects can have variables inside them, yeah, just like JavaScript.
Yep. So you could have
The
like
head
custom
can keep track
variables.
of the tail if it wants to. It's possible.
So it is like a struct with custom variables. So you could have something like, for example, a list of other objects.
Yeah. But to make this snake object, we didn't even need to do any of that.
No. We don't need to have the association because we are basing it on this time thing, as you said. But
yeah,
and you're really
I guess if you wanted the snake head to manage the objects and like it be the one to decide who gets deleted, then yeah, you might.
Well, I was thinking more like if you go from this simple version of Snake to something where you have multiplayer and you have two snakes and you want to keep track of these objects and like this snake is going that way and you want to check if it's going to collide with this thing, so you need some association to the head that it's associated to.
Oh yeah, the tail segments, the body segments should know which player they are.
Yeah. So okay, let's just not go to that yet and just focus on like what would you do to like finish up the snake game where it's going to grow.
Like walls and things. You need the apple.
Mm-hmm.
And you want like a score as well. Yeah,
so like the functionality there is like the snake has to grow, and there's also like going from one end to the other, right? Unless you make this collidable, so collision. So we have to talk about that. So even in the case where it collides with itself, right? How do you deal with that?
On collision. Game over.
But that would mean, if you think about the way we structured the snake object, where it's a head, and every time interval, it will leave a bunch of objects. I'm just going to call it tail objects in its sort of path. So in this case, so the head is moving.
Yeah.
And it's also creating these tail objects that then will get created and also get destroyed based on time. And so the collision is very simple in that the entire tail and the head, these two have to do a collision check for multiple things. They have to do a collision check on both all the head with all the other things, all the tail, and for every tail object with other tail plus head, right?
The tail object shouldn't need to check against each other.
That's true. Yeah, no. The tail, that's true. It never mutate. It will never be driving. That's the driving force. So it's really just the tail with head with the tail, but also with the apple.
Yep. And the wall.
Unless you want it to go... Oh, even if it goes, so you still need the wall collision to go to the other side.
You want like walls in the level just to make it more visible.
So you were saying that these walls are invisible objects? that right?
That's how they do it for some games. That like, if you've made a like tile-based like nice scenery with platforms and like it looks nice, but they all behave the same, like they're just collision, then you'd basically make your background image this level, and then you would put in the collision objects so that you could then jump on these platforms, even though the platforms aren't really there, they're just in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah, and by not really there, I mean they're not objects, they're just background images, but the objects are actually collision, invisible collision objects.
Yeah. So we could have like...
You wouldn't do that here. You would see the walls in this game, so...
Okay. I mean, yeah. I guess one thing you could do is like, this is gonna be fixed, this rectangle. So yeah. So you're saying like we can actually make these objects visible as opposed to just background image. But if we wanted to introduce, say, like terrain, like more complicated stuff.
Actually, having it as a background image, like a tile-based background, that would actually look pretty good because you could have your Snake game have nice graphics.
Well, I mean, that's what I was going to suggest in, like, if you want to put terrain in here, let's say you had, like, a base or something.
Yeah.
I mean, the ultimate multiplayer that I was thinking about is, like, the capture the flag thing where you've got, like, a flag or something and there's terrain, maybe.
Like, you could imagine handcrafting the level, like, pixel by pixel, everything. And then, like, there's your background image and you put the collision objects on top of it and they're invisible. Yeah. Can do that.
Yeah, so there's a potential list of collision objects and that we want to check for, but there's a sort of geometry here as well that maybe is worth encoding in the structure. Like you want to know, like, this is the most right wall or the left wall or the top wall or the bottom wall.
With the room edges, like I'd be inclined to encode that into like just the snake head itself. Like if its position goes out of bounds, then kill it. Although you probably want to show the walls so that the player can see that you can't hit the edge. So you probably actually put walls in.
What do you mean encoding it in? Sorry. You mean just in this logic of position?
So your drawing there, are those X's outside the room?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so for that, like you can have the snake just check if it ever goes outside the room.
Yeah.
On every frame.
Yeah. So like the game logic of its size is already encoded in its.
Yeah, it can see the room size.
Yeah. But I think like maybe if you wanted to make this a multi-room game, maybe where you had like, imagine Snake that it's not just like one rectangle, but a set of rooms.
Oh yeah.
Where it's like,
so when you get to the edge, you enter a different room.
Yeah, something like that, and it's like this maze of Snake, and maybe in the multiplayer, like you can be in this room. And the other one's in this room doing its thing.
You can do capture the flag.
And then when it, so like now you're creating this massive map.
Yeah.
And that would make it better than just like one massive rectangle. I like that. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah, you can have objects which, like on collision, it changes the current room.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, like, let's say there was a door here and you entered this passageway and you went into this room. How do you transition rooms?
So you can change the current room. You just say, go to this room now. And then in order for your character to come out the right door, you'd need to like handle that yourself. So like when you hit a door, you'd probably want to say like which location door you hit, so that when the room loads, it can go, okay, you hit that door.
Because like this transition from this transition, there could be another room here, and like there's a door here.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so you kind of need to know that this state transition corresponds to this location, and this state transition corresponds to this location. So we need like room changing, having the ability to pass on information to the next room's transition state to say like more information about what it might need to do for the objects, you know.
Yeah, global variable.
Yeah.
Easy.
But like I'm thinking how would you do this in multiplayer where you do room transitions for like one player? Maybe we're thinking too far ahead, but
No, that's still fair because that's still a global variable for the client,
yeah.
like that player, because they're just going to be showing that like it's literally a
It's
global
really
variable
it's
for them.
just for them, yeah. But if you
Yeah.
have two things going on where like I'm here and you're there and
Yeah,
we need to somehow correspond,
yeah.
you
So
did
the
a room
server shouldn't be
transition.
thinking in terms of rooms.
Yeah,
Probably.
exactly. So that if you did transition here, maybe the server ticks are saying what your opponent is in and sort of consolidating the room transitions or the states. I mean, basically everything we describe has to be described in terms of a server that's like ticking through and doing exactly the same sort of logic, but for both players, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, we can think about that later, but have I still want to focus on the sort of original problem of just Snake and the growing. Have we covered pretty much most of it?
So there's still like a score.
Oh, yes.
So you'd want to show the score, and so that would be another object. And in the draw event, you get access to like drawing whatever you want to do. That's where you could like just draw text and draw shapes and whatnot. So
Yep. And you
I'd
can
probably have like
use
an invisible object that does that.
So would you do something like use the on draw, which gets called per frame to
Yeah.
draw the state of the games of the
Yeah.
player's score. And if you think about maybe a more complex scenario of state where it's not just the score. Let's say you had multiplayer again,
and a different weapon inventory.
Exactly. So like this snake can shoot bullets.
Yeah.
And
that's dangerous.
Yeah, this is getting more just like designing a different game now, I guess. But yeah, you would have potentially just objects. Like, can we model that? Is the question.
Yeah, you just have object that whose sole purpose is to just show that information.
Yeah, I think it's potentially doable. Now, I guess we can move, unless you want to keep focusing on this. I might want to like transition to how would you actually make a game maker. Unless you have more things that you want to talk about with regards to.
No, I think that's enough to do a pretty capable game maker.
So let's talk about like how we would go about it, like what sort of technologies we would use if we were to make it from scratch. So like I think ideally what sort of is something we're tending towards is like JavaScript and like doing it on the web. But
that's definitely my preference.
And so I guess you could make the GUI with something like Canvas.
So one nice thing about doing it in JavaScript is your game logic can just be JavaScript.
Yep.
So it's like the runtime is already capable of running scripts, whereas most other languages, if you want the user to write their own logic, I guess they'd have to compile everything. But here you don't have to.
But we want to make some sort of editor as well, a UI editor that allows them to draw like rooms or like embed an image. And I guess like let's focus on that. Like how would you
so those things
how would you draw a room?
Before, those are like all the assets of the game. So what objects they have, what sprites they have, what rooms they have, what sounds they have, what background images they have. This is what your game is.
Yeah, so creating those assets is one thing, or importing the assets, right? And so what what makes sense to me is like having a very simple pixel editor like the JS Paint, or even at a more pixelated level where you can actually see the pixels and draw them out.
Yeah, Game Maker came with that, and it was a very good thing to have in there, because you can just edit. Like you need to do little tweaks. Like you might change something, and you go, oh, I gotta make this a bit shorter or something. So it was really useful to be able to edit the sprites in the editor.
So you know how like with JS Paint, for example, it's like it's very like zoomed out. Oops.
Yeah. You want to go down to the pixels.
So we want like a sprite level where you see like the actual square at the pixel level, right?
Mm.
So we're having sort of a zoomed in sprite editor. And I guess we also want to import like these sprites into, like, compose these sprites. So like let's say you did like a very
it supports animation as well. So sprites can have multiple frames. So you can have, animating characters and everything. And the pixel editor like supports, there's a web-based pixel, like click try an example.
You know, it would be good if we could just like harness something like this. So instead of us making it, we just
iframe,
we just reuse a tool like this as the editor.
Yeah.
Like, what's the format that you get out? Export as a sprite sheet, right?
Mm.
So maybe like
we could say like if you click edit, it just opens it in this thing. Yeah, but you want like a nice. Ideally, they'd be like nicely integrated with each other.
Yeah, I mean, technically, yeah. I mean, I was just wondering if they have like, no, I don't know.
You'd have to work with these guys to.
True, but I mean, having a couple clicks to like save it, and we can have a link to go here and say create your sprite or whatever, and then upload it to local storage or whatever, if that's what we're gonna do. But I sort of want to keep it high level. Like, we could make this, but we could also just make use of that thing that you just sent me.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the assets. I guess with sound, we could also like have some external sound thing, or just import. The real thing is
Game Maker, it was just import, and now you have sound assets. There weren't any editing tools.
Right. But the thing is, with this sprite editor and sound editor, we want to be able to import these assets. That's the key thing.
Yeah, you must be able to import, definitely.
And I guess if we're going to make this thing, how are we going to store the game? Like, we could make, say, a PWA app that harnesses like local storage.
Yep. Yeah, I could make use of the file system using fancy APIs, or just store it in local storage.
Yep. And so we import the stuff, it goes into local storage for your project. And then let's say we have imported this guy. What then? What next do we see in terms of our game engine maker thing?
So if you import the sprite, you should now have a sprite, and you give it a name.
So we need like a bucket of like how to manage
all the
assets.
Different assets are their own buckets. Yeah, objects, sprites, sounds, background images, rooms, and scripts. Scripts are also their own bucket. Scripts are basically just global functions that you can call from anywhere.
So they'll be like JS scripts. Okay, so um, I let's just like do a bit of UXy type pretending like we have something. So let's say your your page here has like all I see at the moment is like import, and then when you click import, it like asks you for like sprites and sounds, and then it sort of goes into this bucket of stuff.
Yeah.
And then you have like a bunch of sprites you can use for your game. And also, what about and the room as well?
Yeah.
You want to
So the objects and the rooms, like you'll need full-fledged editors for those.
yeah. So let's say you click rooms, and it gives you like a tab.
Yeah, yeah.
And in the room tab,
I can imagine on the side you see like a list of all your rooms, and then you click on the one you want to edit.
yeah.
And then
So let's say you have 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't know. And then you click on one, and then it's just this blank square.
Yeah, yeah.
And
you've got all these properties like what's its width and height. Is it the main room? What's the frame rate? What's the start script? What's the grid size? Like 32 by 32.
What's that? What's the difference between width and height and grid size? Sorry.
So in Game Maker, rooms have a grid so that when you put objects in it, it snaps to the grid.
Ah, okay.
So if you're creating a tiled thing, like you want it to snap to the right size.
Right, I see. So if you made it 1 by 1, it would snap to the smallest 1 by 1.
It would just be pixels, yeah.
So if you have a sprite that's bigger than that grid size, what happens?
It's still locked to the grid. It's just big.
So the grid size just shows you like how big the tile set is that the room is going to be divided into.
Yeah, it's really just for the editor so that you can place things in the grid.
I see. So you should be able to drag and drop sprites or whatever in there.
Objects.
Sorry, yeah objects. But that's related to the start up. Like this is where it's starting to get complex, where this is just like some state, and it has to be associated to one of the states, like its initial state. During the game, with like the snake going from here.
Yeah, when you place the objects, that's just what to start the room with.
Okay, so this is just the initial state.
Yeah, initial objects.
I see. And so that then would have associated the object to its position and all that stuff. So internally in our engine,
yeah,
we've like gone from this to like the object's position. So do you also say like the velocity and speed and stuff like that if you wanted to?
In Game Maker, no, but like I think that's a good idea. You should be able to say all kinds of properties to start the object at.
So there'll be a lot of like UI stuff that you could do to initiate a state of the game.
Like, I think velocity might not be suitable, but direction I think is definitely you want to be able to put an object somewhere and also be able to orient it the way you want. So you could be putting down like decals, like pots and pans on a top-down screen, and you want it to look interesting, so you'll rotate them so that they're not all exactly the same.
So, so let's say the initial room, like let's say you're making Mario, right? And let's say that the initial room is, I actually can't see the drawing, so I'm just going to make it bigger. What? Why is it zoom. So? Oh, is it the zoom?
You're at, yeah, you're at 5%.
Well, yeah. So let's say in Mario, right, you have like a bunch of things going on. You have like clouds, and you have like enemies going that way. You have Mario going, and it's just there, and then you have like
you have all these objects that like are just for decoration, and so you like turn collisions off, and they'll just be sitting there or like slowly moving, and basically passive. They're just to make it look nicer.
But in this game, as you're going like this way, it's changing. So how do you encode like a bigger scene
Oh
in like
yeah.
a room.
Okay, that's a good point. So I guess rooms have a viewport
Mm,
of how much you can see, which is separate from the room's actual size. And so if you've got a
yes.
scrolling game, your room's going to be very long.
So we only see like this section
Yeah,
of a bigger
that's
thing.
a good point. I
And
think in Game Maker, the viewport was like a global thing that you set for the
right,
entire
but it should
thing.
be per room.
It
And in
should be
fact,
per room. I agree.
and to make it immersive, like it's some massive world, you could
Mm,
have multiple rooms that, yeah, you're just like changing the viewport, but you can go from this to that. Like
exactly.
ultimately, like you've seen like Castlevania style games, like
Yeah,
Metroidvania, where it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
all these
It's
massive,
all a huge interconnected world, but they're all made up
exactly.
of individual rooms. Yeah,
Yeah, and we should be able to make it with this thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's like having basically portals. When you
Mm.
touch a certain part of the room, it takes you to another room.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is looking pretty good. Now we just got to make it. Um, but like if we focus on the actual technologies and how you do this for a sec.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this UI that someone could use, and like if you visualize what it would look like, they could, like, let's say they wanted to make this complex Castlevania type thing, right? How do
Mm.
you make it easy for them to like do that?
You'd want, I guess you'd want like a room manager and where you can like plan out your game and just position your rooms uh, next to each other
Yeah.
just for your own planning. So you can see, okay, this goes to that room, that goes to that room. And like it does never appear in the game, but it's just for you to organize your rooms.
I think if you think about rooms as separate things, right?
Yeah.
I think that's fine, but I think we could like specifically tailor for the connectivity of rooms and just
Yeah,
like
I was wondering if
like
like the
draw a
portals
connection
between
where you have
rooms.
like this room that's massive and this room, and you just
Yeah,
like plonk them together and they're connected, and they don't have to do anything. It's like embedded in our game maker where you could just say where's the entry point, and it could be wherever
yeah,
it is in
yeah,
this room, and it's just a
yeah.
portal to some location, but they're
So,
connected
so
because you've joined them together.
declaring the portals between rooms. Yeah,
And so
making
like
it more of a primitive.
so I'm imagining like this thing, this UI, where you have like the entire world is just like this collection of rooms that you can scroll this way or that
Mm,
way, and you can
mm,
see
mm.
the game states when they initially happen, and it's like
Right. So
painting,
you're editing multiple rooms at once
yeah, and it's
in
like
giant.
those
Yeah, no, I like
comics,
that.
like the comics like that you have like each box is
Yeah,
like a sequence of
yeah,
stuff,
yeah, yeah.
so you're effectively like drawing a comic in a way.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. And so your editor is like updating based on whichever room you've got like in focus.
Yeah,
But you can just freely like just scroll
scroll
across
through
them.
it and read it like a comic. In
Yeah,
fact, what I
yeah.
really think would be good is if you can make a comic within this thing. So like you're
Uh-huh.
just drawing for each room a scene in a comic.
Yeah, no,
And
I
then
that
when you
would
hit play, it's effectively just like if you don't have any game logic, it's going to just like snapshot through the different rooms, which is effectively like a comic editor that
hmm,
you can make. But you can
yeah,
also make it
yeah.
like
Hey, we're
interactive.
making the sprite editor again.
Hmm. Yeah,
This is just sprite frames.
but more complex.
Yeah, yeah. With like I guess you can put objects that do stuff in it. Yeah.
Hmm.
You still need to like um tell it when to like change rooms properly.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm. Okay.
I guess you could have a script that goes for like every single room, and then it could just be like change after 5 seconds
Right.
or something.
Yeah.
Go to next room.
But it should be easy enough to do with the set of things that you could do with this thing.
Yeah, I think making the connections between rooms like an actual thing, like you can query them, you can write logic around it. You can say like go to connected room 1 or something.
Hmm.
or like say that a certain object is the room portal to this other room, so that when your player like collides with it, it can say like activate portal, and then it'll switch the rooms.
And you know how we said there's like this initial state that you can draw? I reckon for each room you could have like a set of potential states that you can set. So like for each room,
I like that idea.
and
yeah.
then based
So it
on
has a
that, you can
default
change
state.
up like that way the entry
Yeah.
points is easy. You just draw the
Then
states.
you can just say like, yeah, I set the room to this state, and you've already drawn it like
Exactly,
in the level.
exactly.
Yeah.
So like if the snake enters from this room, this location, you just draw that. And then if you just have to do the transitions, it's easy. You just like have
And
a
they can
set
be diffs of the default state. So if the only difference is like the player is over here instead, and everything else is the same, you don't need to like redraw everything else.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe you could also like have the end state as a thing you draw. So like when you want it to finalize, just like on create and on destroy.
End state? What do you mean?
So you know how we're drawing the state of the room based on its initial state. You could also draw it based on the maybe just like any arbitrary state that you want, and that way you can set what it looks like on.
Yeah. I figure it's like just set room to this state. It's, yeah. So I guess if you have like a certain way you want it to look when the player dies, like you want to break all of the pots and pans and things, you could draw that up, and then when the player dies, you just set the room to that state.
Yep. Like a game over or something.
So having the rooms have multiple like configurations, that's a good idea.
All right.
Game Maker never had that.
What should we call this?
Dog Maker.
Let's call it
Dennis.
The Menace. Copyrighted. Let's
Copyright
call it
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates.
Oh, call it Bill Gates. Copyright Bill Gates.
We'll call it McDonald's, Apple, Windows. All right, to be decided. To be decided.
Trademark intended. Yep.
We'll just call it Make Stuff for now.
Make stuff. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Make
All
life.
I'm gonna add the video.
Cool.